Welcome back to Cove Street Boatworks. Today we are in middle of New Hampshire and we are at Zachary or Zach Smith. Zach, you prefer that?
Yes, Zach's fine.
We're up here with Zach Smith. I brought a old E.M. white canoe up. Zach is somewhat of a specialist with early Maine canoes, Gerrishes and E.M. whites and others, and he's going to tell you all about that. But we're potentially going to do a trade here. He's got one really nice example with a D-shaped rear seat, and he was very interested in this white, which is slightly earlier, and he can go into some details on that afterwards. It has some mortise thwarts in it, probably a little less practical for a daily user, and his is bolted thwarts, so it's a little more practical. So we're going to talk about these two boats. We're going to talk about his restoration work, which you're going to see in the building behind us. We're going to go in and take a look at some of the restored canoes, and then he's going to tell us a little bit about his philosophy and approach, and he even has a guide boat that he's working on that we'll take a look at. So we're going to get set up and we will be back, and thank you very much. So let's talk about these two whites. This is the first time we've seen these two early boats together. I know that the boats with the D-shaped rear seat are not at all common. This is a very unusual boat. You were saying, Zach, that you felt the nameplate was a little bit different than the normal nameplate. It's smaller in size?
Correct. It's a brass nameplate. I believe it was originally painted with some black and white paint. It's now totally brass, but it seems a little smaller than the others I've seen in the past.
Okay. And the leather pieces on the end and the way that the outwales extend beyond the stem is also another unique characteristic we don't see on the other boat, right?
Certainly, that's it's an earlier feature. Research that I've done with similar EM whites as this one. I think they've only come across 3 examples in the past, and these leather wrapped tips are in very good shape. Actually, very good examples of how the others could be restored if need be.
All right. The decks on these are a different shape too. When we look at the early boat behind us here in a minute, we're going to see the decks are very, very small and they're very simple, very triangular shaped. These have a nice scalloped edge on them that I don't think I've seen on even the slightly later boats. Is that sort of unique to this time period or just my experience?
So I believe it's this model canoe. This model, I believe, was called the regular model for a length of time in a few catalogs. I was told it was called that as a friend of mine who has an example similar to this. But yes, a little bit fancier canoe, probably more of a pleasure boat than a guide model or a hunting, fishing type canoe.
Okay. And interestingly, there's no partial floor frames in this. This is all just framed out. Do you say ribs or frames?
Ribs.
Ribs. I'm of the frame school. I'm old school, right?
It's all right.
Ribs are in fish. That's what my father and I used to tell me.
Okay.
Frames are in canoes. We frame a boat out. We don't rib it out. But now it's become very acceptable vernacular for talking about boats. So we'll say ribs just so we don't talk past each other or overload terms.
Fair enough.
There's no floor frames in between the ribs. These are just ribbed out, which is unusual. I think the other boat that I have, which maybe is like you're suggesting, maybe this was a fancier model. Maybe the other one I have that's just slightly newer than this one, maybe that was also a guide kind of boat and maybe they had the floor frames in it. And what we're talking about are partial frames that go just across the bottom of the boat in between these frames.
Half ribs.
Half ribs, yeah. And they're usually narrower, and we'll take a look at them in the earlier boat, but yeah, there's none in here, which is a little bit surprising.
I am not aware of half ribs in a regular model. You probably could have ordered them if somebody would need them, want them from the factory back in the day. But the few examples that I have seen in this model, I've never seen half ribs.
So speculatively, we're thinking this boat could be in what kind of time period? What are we thinking?
If I had to put a date on that, it would be right around 1900.
1900. There's an interesting transition between, and again, Zach may have discovered there may be some model differences here, but the boat behind us is more craftsman centric, I guess. There's more thought or more effort that went into producing the pieces. Like the thwarts that are here on this boat are very flat. They're very utilitarian. Maple, we think, maybe, right?
Yep.
So they're very much made for utility. They're strong, they're light, they're easy to reproduce. Whereas the boat behind us, they're carved, and they're very elegantly carved. They're much more three-dimensional. They're mortised into the inwales where these are bolted through. And I think, we haven't measured them yet, but I think I can make the assessment that the taper, the thickness of the ribs on this boat are more uniform. There is still a tapering as you go toward the sheer, toward the top, but I think it's more extreme on the boat behind us. And it may be in both dimensions. They may be thicker to start with and then tape to a thinner dimension as they move up toward the sheer, toward the top of the boat, the gunnels.
I would agree.
Yeah, it's odd. And Zach was noticing, we haven't taken the boats apart, but he was noticing that there appears to be heavier planking on here, perhaps, potentially. So
Yes, once again, for a guide model, that's going to get heavy use. And really, back in the day, you would throw a deer in here, you'd throw 2 or 3 deer in here. You go off on a camping, a fishing, and hunting trip for a week. Gear, it's going to get used. It's not just going to be a couple people sitting in here rowing down to the other end of the river, a mile or 2 away. This is going to go on a week-long journey or a 2-week-long journey.
whereas this perhaps was a little more recreational.
I believe it was.
Okay.
I certainly believe it was. In the catalogs, you would have which model you would like to purchase.
So on this boat, one thing that sort of struck me, and now that I'm looking at both of them, maybe I was wrong. I was thinking that this boat may have been refinished, but now that I'm looking at the two of these and I've had a moment to sort of assess, I tend to agree with Zach. I think this does look pretty original. There's not much finish in there whatsoever, which is what you would expect. These things were not made to look like there was a film of plastic on it. It was strictly utilitarian. The less weight, the better. So this does look very, very thinly applied. My initial concern, and I don't think it bared out, but whenever you see white spots around the ends of the canoe tacks, usually, if they're not Old Town World War II era steel tacks, which have a huge tendency to corrode and fall apart, if they're brass, then that can indicate that the boat's been used in salt water and that there's corrosion around it. And what happens is that very thin part of the tack that gets clenched over can literally corrode off and loosen the frame. It's not a big structural issue because you can always replace the tacks, but it's an annoying issue because some of them are holding well enough you don't want to pull them out because it leaves dents on the outside of the canoe when you try to pull them out, unless you're going to replace the frame. And that's the whole reason you replace a frame, is you want to save the planking. So usually I take a sheetrock knife and literally split the frame out so I can more carefully remove the tacks, because the frame is the easiest thing to put in.
The rib.
Yeah, the rib, excuse me, the rib. The planking's not easy to put in, but these appear to be still pretty tight.
Yes, I tend to agree. So it was around saltwater. I don't know if it was in saltwater, but even if you're relatively close to the ocean, I don't know, probably the first couple miles inland, that could be possible just as well. My current place of employment, we have still some salt damage, and we're probably about 2 miles from the ocean. So depending on which way the wind's blowing regularly, yep, you could get some of that ocean air, and it could impact that. Might not have ever been in the ocean, theoretically.
Beautiful boat. Very, very unusual to see one in this kind of condition at this age.
The one thing that's surprising, both of these side by side are a couple of the earlier examples that are in existence still, and they still have the original canvas on them, which is very surprising to me. We were conversing a little earlier about the fact that there's probably lead in these canvases. I believe this has red lead in the canvas, as you can be seen through in a couple little places, and it looks like this is white lead, but it's just amazing what lead does for extending the longevity of the canoe canvas. I really think we could put both of these in the water and we're not immediately going to sink, and they probably haven't been in the water in decades.
Literally decades, yeah. All right, well, Zach wanted to pull out one of his Gerrish canoes because he wanted to compare the Gerrish against this very early white, just looking at some differences and some similarities. Zach was telling me the story about Gerrish paddling down the river. You can go ahead and tell it because you know it better than I do.
The old story goes, I've been trying to actually dig this story down on paper myself, but as written in a couple books, Mr. Edwin White, the maker of this canoe, and this canoe was paddling down the Penobscot River just outside of Bangor, Maine. And actually, I'm sorry, Mr. Gerrish was paddling down the Penobscot River, Bangor, Maine, and Mr. White was on shore and noticed his canoe and went over and inspected it. As he went over it and pulled up on shore, looked at it very well, and not long after, he started making canoes at his home with some horsepower, literally horsepower, and soaking wood in his family's bathtub.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to move some stuff around here. We're going to get the Gerrish out. Maybe we can take this white off the horses and put the Gerrish here. I don't know. You think? And that way we can get closer with the camera and we can take a look at the differences. So give us a minute and we'll make that change around. We're looking here at a very early Gerrish canoe, right? What Gerrish, is that the real name? Is that the tag Gerrish? What, is there a more formal name to it?
E.H. Gerrish, Evan Hughes Gerrish. There's a couple different tags that were made over the years. They're not all the same. Just like White, I would assume that they made a run of them. Whenever they used them up, they would change them up or slightly differ them. Gerrish canoes actually didn't even have tags for the entire lifespan of the company.
You mean Whites or Gerrish?
Gerrish.
Gerrish didn't have tags.
At one point, he actually had a 12 by 12 stencil made up that he would paint on the bow of the planking underneath the canvas. So one would never know they had a Gerrish canoe until they were to take the canvas off. I do own one of those canoes currently, and was sort of a surprise to see it. Probably roughly the same age canoes, within a few years of each other would be my best guess. This canoe has seats. That canoe does have seats, but they were not original to that canoe for sure.
Agreed.
This seat is probably the earliest construction of a rear seat in any canoe. Very transitional method. The way that it was lapped into the top of the rail and either bolted or copper riveted through the rear part of the seat. That seat is totally mortised, which, as anybody knows in woodworking, is a very weak system of joinery, and it did not last very long in canoe history.
The structures, whether it's the thwarts or the seats, they're curved, huh? They're not flat.
They do have that appearance of being upward facing.
Yeah.
Definitely a carving technique that mimicked the Penobscot and Passamaquoddy Indian birch bark canoes of the day. Mr. Gerrish certainly carried on lots of birch bark canoe traits, including the lashings on the deck. Throughout his building career, he incorporated lashings in different areas, different amounts of lashing. He would have lashings such as here for a fake looking carrying handle. He would put lashings around the tip. It was throughout his building career, he changed up his build techniques.
It is an absolutely stunning boat to see here in person. I can see the similarities, or at least the influence, perhaps, like you're suggesting, with the thwarts are very, very carved, similar to the early E.M. White.
Absolutely.
Although these are probably more elegant than the Whites. The Whites are a little more extreme. And you can see the same kind of, is there a specific name to that last thwart? Is that
A quarter thwart
quarter thwart? So you can see
or carrying
similar
thwart.
carrying thwart,
Yep.
similar kinds of functionality, but again, the Gerrish is much, much more carved and fine. This is just a remarkably refined canoe for the early history of it.
The decks were a little bit fancier as well. Gerrish decks, for the majority of his building career, were heart-shaped like this. He also did have a few years that he built canoes with similar type decks. Certainly a little bit bigger, but definitely definitely different building techniques with the decks just as well over the years. He was in business for 35, 40 years, somewhere through there. So it's a long time for him to be making everything the same, and I'm sure you'd want to change anything up. Just like building a car, they don't build them all the same.
So you pointed out one of the other things that sort of stands right out is the fact that these planks are very narrow compared to the whites. The whites are enormous. So what's your observation there?
This roughly has 2-inch wide planking through it, very narrow. The E.M. white here has some that is approaching 8 inches. I am not sure why. I don't know if it would be easier to build with, if it would be a time savings thing to throw on a wider plank there and then tack it down quickly. I don't know if it would be the available materials that they had at the time. Speaking of materials, so it would be all white cedar, both of these canoes planking. Later canoes, 1915, 1920, they started using Western red cedar as it was a little bit easier available to get, even though the white cedar was right in their backyard. It was becoming more scarce as the larger canoe companies were scoffing up that wood.
Two other things I noticed here, we talked about this before we started rolling again. The frame thickness on the Gerrish appears to be pretty uniform from top through the middle to the other side, as opposed to the white, which is definitely tapered.
Certainly. Honestly, I have not seen ribs tapered as extreme as in that canoe before. Once again, I would say that's more of a low production canoe, much more handwork than Mr. Gerrish, who had a shop downtown Bangor and employed a handful of people at the time. Obviously had power at the time, right on the Penobscot River. A little bit easier to make. Certainly had more machinery to work with.
And the last thing I think I noticed is this has the Gerrish has a finer line to it. There's nowhere near as much tumble home. This is much more straight-sided.
Correct.
Whereas this white in particular has enormous tumble home, even more than the other early white with the D-shaped seat that we were looking at.
Absolutely.
So is that because this was the white was more guide oriented and it really needed more reserve capacity when they threw, things, prey that they were hunting, deer or whatever in there, they had to be able to carry that extra capacity. This would give them additional buoyancy as they loaded the boat, whereas this would be much easier to submerge. Not totally, but it would definitely have a increasing water line very, very quickly.
Certainly. Yeah, you would have that extra little bit of insurance if you had to lean one way or the other, maneuvering going down a river. Yeah, no doubt, no doubt that would be a little bit better for tripping. Just as well, the splash factor. You're coming down in through some rapids, you're going to get the water that runs off, and instead of running into your boat, possibly just as well.
You have a nice sort of satin finish on the varnish on the inside. Is that actually what you used?
Yes, it was. So this is Epiphanes, however somebody wants to pronounce it. Yep. The technique, which it says right from the manufacturer, is numerous coats of build-up with gloss, and then the last coat or two matte finish. Honestly, it's very easy on the eyes on a sunny day like today. If you had gloss and you were paddling the boat for the whole day, it makes a big difference on your eyes, having to squint. Certainly sunglasses on when you have a gloss finish inside the canoe.
So there's no gloss. I mean, even the paint, there's no gloss on this boat at all. All of it's flattened to some degree.
Correct. Yep. There's definitely some flat tones to the paint. I use Kirby paint on this canoe. I do believe I tried to flatten it out a little bit more just as well. I can't remember exactly what I used because it was a few years ago, but it could be some penetrol in it, which actually will flatten out a little bit just as well. But yeah.
I gotta say, I like it. I didn't think I would. I'm a big gloss guy, mostly because gloss anything is usually the most resilient and the hardest wearing. Typically, satin finishes are often thought to have some surface characteristics that don't lend itself so well to longevity, but this is really nice. I think you might convince me to try this on the next canoe I do.
Very good. The varnish is a little bit different to deal with than gloss because it's a hybrid type. It's actually plastic and oil, and it's very it has a very short working life. I always add a thinner to it of some sort. I can't remember exactly what I use right now, but something
A brush thinner, something to elongate the life a little bit.
Yes. Yep. Actually, 333 Interlux 333 is coming to mind right now. It's got I think kerosene in it, and that kerosene gives you that little bit of longer working life.
Bristle brush or foam?
Foam paint. I will tip it need be. Foam on the outside for sure, but brush on the inside. A good quality. I'm leaning towards ox brushes these days, oxtail brushes.
All right. And by foam on the outside, you're talking rollers.
Correct.
Okay. And then tipping it where you need to.
Correct.
All right. All right.
You mix up the paint appropriately. The bubbles should lay down pretty easily when rolling with a microfoam roller.
So this is an absolutely stunning boat. It's even more impressive in person. That rear seat is beyond words. It's a museum piece. Do you ever take this out?
It has been in the water a few times over the years. Me and my daughter. I'm scared to sit on the rear seat. Honestly, I either kneel on the floor or I bring a kickball. Works very well to put in front of the seat and sit on the kickball in the canoe. My daughter at 10 years old now, and probably 60 pounds-ish, no problem on the front seat. But yeah, I really don't want to replacing these gunnels again because there's only about 3/8 to a ½ inch of meat there holding up that canoe.
How tender is it? It looks like it'd be tipped.
Yep, it's narrow just as well. Honestly, most Gerrishes, you better know how to paddle because you're going to get wet pretty quickly if you spend any length of time in them.
Yeah.
They were tools. They were tools, and generally people who use them knew how to use the tool. This wasn't a couple of kids that were going to take it out and go hang out with their buddy. They were, when this canoe was made, roughly 1890 or so, this really was a tool to navigate up and down a river system, to go to the next town, go to the ocean. Made right downtown Bangor, Maine.
It is stunning. I was telling Zach earlier that I have a Robertson that has similar lines, you know, very, very tender, very fast, very efficient, but really easy to turn. The last time I took my significant other out in the boat 2 years ago, I capsized it 4 times on the lake. I don't think she'll ever go back in the boat with me. The first time we capsized, she'd packed a lunch and everything, and we're watching it float away in the lake. And I thought, I'm dead. This is not good.
I don't have any of those stories. I have dumped a canoe with the wife before, but it was not in a lunch situation like that in the middle of flat water. It was coming down a river with a blowdown in front of us, and we tried to go under when we shouldn't have.
Yeah, not a confidence builder for sure.
No.
All right. I thank you for showing us this. We're going to reset, and we're going to go take a look at some of the other boats in Zach's collection, and then we're going to go look at the guide boat. So stay tuned. We'll be back.
Sounds good.